He saved a frozen baby Bigfoot at his cabin door. The ending made everyone cry, the man and the snowy night. On a silent winter night, Matthew opened the cabin door and froze. Right there in the snow, a small, fragile being lay dying. Not a bear, not a human. Its eyes half closed, its breath shallow. It was a Bigfoot child. Branches cracked in the darkness. A long whistle echoed from deep within the forest. Matthew knew he was surrounded by an entire clan. In that single moment, he had to choose to save this fragile life, or leave it to the shadows. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the city you're listening from. And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Matthew George had grown used to loneliness. For years, he had lived alone in a small wooden cabin tucked away deep in the snowy woods far from any town or road. Winter nights always seemed endless. When the blizzards passed, what remained was silence so deep that he could hear his own heartbeat inside his chest. Inside the cabin, the fire snapped softly, casting its glow across weathered wooden walls. Matthew sat in an old chair, his eyes fixed on the flames, listening to the wind whistling through the cracks in the door. That quiet should have been familiar, but tonight felt different. Something in the air was wrong, as though the whole forest were holding its breath. Then he heard it, an unfamiliar sound, faint and nearly lost in the wind. Not an owl, not a wild beast. It was a cry. But who could possibly be out there in the frozen night when the paths were buried under yards of snow? Matthew rose to his feet. He pulled on his coat, took up his lantern, and stepped outside. Snow crunched beneath his boots, his breath rising in pale clouds that drifted into the dark. The cry came again, thin, trembling, pulling him closer to the trees. Inside him, a struggle began. Part of him warned, "Don't go farther. It could be a trap." But his heart whispered, "What if a life truly needs saving?" He pressed on the lantern light, sweeping across the white ground. And then he saw it, a small, dark shape half buried in the ice and snow. Part 1. The Child in the Snow. The lantern's trembling light fell upon the tiny figure. Matthew dropped to his knees, brushing away the snow that covered it. His hand froze when he touched the matted fur stiff with ice. Not a bear, not a human. In the dim glow, the face appeared, a flat nose, thick brows, shadowing tightly shut eyes, skin that seemed half human, half beast. The small body curled in on itself, each breath so faint it seemed ready to fade forever. It was a Bigfoot child. For a moment, the blood in Matthew's veins stopped flowing. All his life, he had heard the stories told around campfires, giant shapes moving in the night, eerie howls echoing from the deep woods. He had never believed them. Until now. He froze, lifting his eyes. The forest loomed dark and silent, yet he felt the weight of unseen eyes fixed upon him. A branch snapped. Then a piercing whistle split the night. From far off, a deeper call answered. Matthew's skin prickled. The clan was here. He drew a sharp breath, his heart pounding hard against his ribs. Each second dragged like a suspended sentence. If he saved this child, its family would know. If he left it, it would die right before his eyes. And then instinct, human instinct, rose stronger than fear. Matthew bent down, gathering the fragile creature into his arms. The wet fur was icy cold, the body heavy yet powerless. Its head slumped against his chest, freezing to the touch. Without another thought, he turned and pushed through the snow. Each step sank deep, each one stretched into eternity. Behind him, the darkness waited, full of heavy, haunting sounds. Matthew knew from this moment on his life would never be the same. Part 2. A Battle for Life by the Fire. The cabin door shut tight, shutting out the storm. Matthew laid the small creature on a thick blanket near the hearth. His trembling hands threw more logs onto the flames, the fire leaping higher, spreading golden light across the room. The Bigfoot child did not stir. Its fur was frozen into hard clumps of ice. Its breathing was so faint, Matthew had to lean close to see the chest rise at all. For a terrifying instant, he thought, maybe it's already too late. But he refused to give up. He pulled more blankets over the child and rubbed its tiny arms, trying to press his own warmth into its cold skin. "Come on, don't give up," he he whispered, his voice hoarse in the silence. The first minute passed, then the second. The quiet grew unbearable. Every crackle of the fire seemed to stop Matthew's heart, and then a faint twitch. The child's small fingers curled weakly around the blanket. Its chest lifted a little higher. A ragged breath came, still faint, but longer, steadier. Matthew closed his eyes and let out a breath of his own, as if an entire mountain had been lifted off his chest. It was still alive. He sank down beside it, his eyes never leaving the fragile being. The firelight flickered across its wild, beast-like face, a face that somehow also carried the traces of something human. Each fragile breath sounded like a miracle. Matthew knew the nightmare wasn't over, but for tonight at least the child had stolen back a little piece of life. Part 3. The Call in the Night. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned its glow, falling over the small figure wrapped in blankets. Matthew never took his eyes off it. Yet in his heart he knew the silence outside was not peace. It was the warning of another storm. And then it came. A heavy footstep pressed into the snow, slow but certain. Another answered from a different direction, circling the cabin. Matthew tensed his hand, closing tight around the rifle across his lap. Then a sound tore through the night, a long, piercing whistle that echoed through the forest. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't the wind. It was a call, a language only the Bigfoot could understand. From the distance came a reply, deep and thunderous, rolling through the trees. Beneath the blanket, the child stirred, trembling. A faint whimper slipped from its lips, as if it longed to answer. Matthew's heart jolted. Its clan was right outside. He sprang to his feet, tossing more logs onto the fire. Flames leapt higher, spilling light across the snowy yard. For a moment, the darkness seemed to retreat, but the footsteps did not stop. They kept circling, step by step, round and round the cabin. The Bigfoot child shifted weakly, its blue lips parting, a broken sound escaping like an answer to the whistles outside. In that moment, Matthew knew the confrontation was inevitable. He had not only saved one fragile life, he had touched an entire family waiting in the shadows. Part 4. The Invisible Circle. The night stretched on without end. Matthew sat motionless by the window, rifle laid across his knees, his eyes fixed on the snow beyond. The fire roared in the hearth, fed with every stick of wood he had, glowing like a fortress of light against the dark. But the brighter the fire burned, the more it revealed the truth: the cabin was surrounded. From the north came the crunch of heavy steps. Then silence. Minutes later, the sound again, this time from the south. Testing, circling, probing for weakness. The snow groaned under their weight, each creak striking Matthew's chest like a hammer. Now and then a low growl rumbled through the night, shaking the wooden walls, making the windows quiver. Then silence again. The forest was no longer a companion, it had become a noose, invisible, yet unbreakable, tightening with every passing minute. Matthew knew one thing for certain: if the fire died, the darkness would swallow the cabin whole. And then there would be no guarantee they would keep standing still. By the hearth, the Bigfoot child turned slightly. Its breathing grew steadier, a faint rasp slipping out now and then, as if answering the calls outside. Matthew looked down at it, a strange ache stirring in his chest. He realized this fragile creature was not only a burden. It was the thread that bound him to the giant clan hidden in the night. That night, Matthew did not close his eyes. He sat upright, the fire blazing his gaze, never leaving the window. It was a silent battle light against darkness, courage against fear. Part 5. The First Look. When the dim light of dawn slipped through the small window, Matthew realized he had been awake all night. The pile of wood was nearly gone, the fire reduced to glowing red embers. Outside, the circle seemed to have vanished, yet the enormous footprints stamped deep into the snow yard remained a silent warning. He turned back and froze. The Bigfoot child's eyes were open, deep, dark eyes filled with a strange, quiet curiosity fixed on him. No longer the shallow breaths of the night before, but the fragile pulse of life, trembling yet unmistakable. For a moment, time stood still. A lonely man and a creature of legend, two worlds that should never have met, now faced each other in the same small cabin. Slowly, Matthew bent down, poured a little water into a tin cup, and held it out. The child stared, hesitated, then parted its lips, drinking in tiny sips. Water trickled down its mouth as its rough, trembling hands clutched the cup. A quiet sigh slipped from Matthew's chest. This was no legend, it was a living being, and it needed him. The child let out a faint, broken sound, half a whimper, half a call. The sound tightened Matthew's heart. In its eyes there was no fierceness, only curiosity and a flicker of trust. They sat in silence, eyes locked. And Matthew knew from this moment on, an invisible thread had bound their two lives together. Part 6. The Tracks of the Clan. When the sun rose higher, spreading light across the snow-covered forest, Matthew finally decided to step outside. He opened the cabin door and stopped short. Across the front yard, stamped deep into the white snow, lay enormous footprints. Each one was twice the size of his own, long and wide beyond belief. They circled the cabin again and again, overlapping into tangled rings, as if a whole tribe of giants had surrounded the place all night. Matthew knelt, placing his hand beside one print. His palm covered only half. His throat went dry. These steps had not come and gone. They had stood outside all night, silent, watching, waiting. He lifted his head, gazing into the forest. The wind stirred, carrying with it a strange, rustling sound. No shapes moved among the trees, yet the heavy weight of unseen eyes pressed down on him. Matthew shivered. The clan had not left. They were still there, hidden, patient, following his every move. He turned back toward the cabin, his eyes falling almost unwillingly to the child curled in the blankets. Its dark eyes shimmered in the firelight, wide, and knowing as if it too understood its family was right outside. Matthew let out a long breath. Last night he had saved it from death, but now he realized the true trial had only just begun. Part 7. The Call of the Forest. Evening fell, the last rays of sunlight fading behind the trees. Darkness crept back across the snow. Matthew threw more logs onto the fire, the flames rising high, casting red and orange light against the cabin walls. He sat still, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the window. And then it came. A long whistle, high and piercing, carried from deep within the forest. It cut through the night, reaching for the little cabin. The sound was vast, unearthly, unlike any animal Matthew had ever known. The Bigfoot child stirred. Its dark eyes widened, turning toward the woods. From its throat came a faint, trembling note like a fragile melody breaking in the wind. Matthew froze. The child was answering. At once, another call rang out, lower, deeper, like thunder rolling through the earth. The reply shuddered through the air, making the cabin's walls tremble. The child called again, stronger this time, clearer, as if speaking in a language older than time itself. Out in the forest, the shadows shifted. Matthew caught sight of tall forms moving among the trees, silent, unmistakable. They did not charge. They did not cross into the fire's reach. They only stood there, watching, calling, listening. Matthew's heart pounded. The cabin now pulsed with a strange dialogue, an exchange between the child and its clan. A language of the forest, a language of legend, and Matthew knew the moment of decision was drawing near. Part 8. The Painful Decision. That night the calls from the forest never ceased. At times sharp and piercing, at times low and thunderous, they rose and fell like a haunting chorus. Each time the clan called, the Bigfoot child trembled, answering with its fragile voice, dark eyes shimmering as they turned toward the shadows. Matthew sat motionless by the fire, torn apart inside. He had saved it from death, had watched it open its eyes, had heard its breathing grow stronger with each passing day. It was no longer a creature of legend to him. It had become his responsibility. And yet its eyes, its trembling cries, all spoke the same truth. It belonged elsewhere. Its family was still out there waiting, patient, unyielding. Matthew rose, his hands clenched tight. He pulled on his coat, then bent to lift the child into his arms. It clung to him, its rough nails catching in the fabric of his jacket. The firelight cast their shadows on the wooden wall, one lonely man and one lost child. He stepped outside. The wind sliced against his skin, snow crunching beneath his boots. The forest loomed black as a pit, And then between the trees, dozens of eyes appeared, red, yellow, pale green, glimmering like ghostly torches in the dark. Matthew knelt, setting the child down on the snow. At once it grasped his hand, its dark eyes brimming, pleading not to be left. His heart wrenched. He gave a small nod, his voice rough with sorrow. Go. Go back to your family. And in that moment he knew he had chosen the hardest path of all, letting go. Part 9. The Reunion. The child wavered on the snow, taking hesitant, shaky steps. It turned back toward Matthew, eyes wide and searching as if to ask, is it safe? Matthew did not answer. He only stood tall, his hand dropping to his side, his gaze steady. His silence was the answer. From the darkness ahead, a colossal figure emerged. Twice the height of a man, shoulders broad fur, dark and thick eyes glowing like embers in the black forest. An adult Bigfoot. It did not snarl, it did not charge. Instead, it bent low, lowering its massive face to the ground. The child let out a small, trembling cry, this time filled with joy, and rushed into arms long and strong as oak. Matthew held his breath. For one brief instant, the giant's gaze met his own. There was no rage in it, no show of gratitude. It was something deeper, quieter, a kind of recognition. For several heartbeats they stood in silence, a man and a legend amid the snowbound forest, in a stillness heavy as stone. Then the towering Bigfoot turned, clutching the child close to its chest, retreating step by step into the shadows. The glowing eyes scattered, fading one by one like distant lanterns. At last, only Matthew remained standing alone in the white yard. Behind him, the fire in the cabin still burned red, and inside him, a hollow space had opened, something lost, and something given beyond what any words could ever explain. Part 10. The mark left behind. In the days after that strange reunion, Matthew's cabin returned to its old rhythm. He still rose at dawn, split wood for the fire, simmered a little soup in the battered pot. At night, the wind still whistled through the cracks, and the embers glowed across the empty room. On the surface, nothing had changed. Yet Matthew felt it deeply. The forest was different now. It was no longer only a place of cold winds and wolf cries. Now each step he took, each time he opened the door, came with a heavy, mysterious feeling like unseen eyes were watching. Not with hostility, but with a strange sense of protection. Then the signs began to appear. One early morning, stepping onto the porch, Matthew nearly dropped his lantern. There on the snow lay a deer, whole, untouched, not torn by claws or teeth. It had been laid neatly at his door, as if placed there for him. Days later, by the fence, he found a heap of fresh fish, their silver scales still glistening. Another time, broken branches had been stacked against the railing in a strange shape, deliberate, not random like a sign. Matthew no longer doubted. This was not a threat. This was remembrance. The Bigfoot clan had not forgotten. They did not speak the language of men, but in their own way they left behind words of gratitude. Time passed. The snow-melted streams rushed again. The forest dressed itself in green. Matthew began to hunt farther, yet always felt a quiet presence behind him, a sound in the brush, a fleeting shadow, a branch swaying, though the air was still. Then one morning, as the sun lifted above the mountains, Matthew stopped at the forest's edge, and he froze. Before him, standing tall on the open ground, was a familiar figure, no longer weak as on that snowy night. Now it stood strong, fur-gleaming eyes glowing like embers in the dawn. The Bigfoot child. In that moment, the forest held its breath. Only the pounding of Matthew's heart filled the silence. The child tilted its head, deep black eyes steady, unafraid. It remembered the man who had lifted it from the ice, who had kept it alive through the long night. Matthew gave a small nod. He did not speak. He knew words meant nothing here. But the nod was enough. It carried the message, I remember, and I do not regret. The child gave a soft sound, half whistle, half song. From the shadows of the trees, other great forms appeared, tall, massive yet still not threatening. They waited. The child looked back at Matthew one last time. In its eyes flickered something unspoken: connection, gratitude, and a trace of longing. Then it turned, stepping into the forest. In a breath, it and the clan vanished, leaving only the vast silent woods. Matthew stood there for a long time, his hand clenched at his side as if holding on to the last warmth of that final meeting. He knew he would never see them again. But that no longer mattered. What mattered was this: he was no longer the lonely man of the snowbound woods. He had been seen, acknowledged by a people the world only dared to call a legend. And he understood some miracles reveal themselves only when a man dares to open his arms in kindness, even to what the world fears most. The everlasting Mark night fell once more upon the forest. Matthew sat before the fire in his cabin, the flames flickering against the wooden walls. But this time, the fire no longer lit the shadow of a lonely man. It lit a soul forever changed, bound to something beyond human understanding. He remembered the deep black eyes of the Bigfoot child. He remembered the way its trembling hands clutched at his coat, and the moment it turned away, stepping back into the arms of its family. Those memories did not fade. They carved themselves into his heart. Perhaps the world would never believe. If he told the story, they would laugh, call it drunken talk, a fireside fable. But Matthew did not need belief. He knew on that snowy night in this small cabin he had lived a miracle. He had learned a truth that kindness can bridge even the widest divide, that a hand offered in the moment of peril can unite two worlds thought forever apart, and that sometimes the reward is not honor or glory, but a quiet recognition, a gift left silently at your door. From that day on, Matthew never looked at the forest the same way. The wind through the trees no longer sounded cold, but like a whisper. The distant roars no longer brought fear, but a greeting. And each time he stepped outside, he felt it. He was never truly alone. If anyone asked him about miracles, Matthew would only smile, for he knew miracles are not always bright lights in the sky. Sometimes they are simply a fragile life held in your arms on a winter night. If you believe kindness has the power to change the world, share this story so that others may hear it too. And don't forget, follow Bigfoot Tales, where legends remind us that we are never truly alone. The next story might just change the way you see the world around you.